Next, we have Thina Saltvedt. Thina is a market analyst at Nordea Markets. Nordea is the largest financial services group in the Nordic and Baltic region and has a significant focus on sustainable investment. I think Nordea, is this correct, was recently named Bank of the Year?
That's correct.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Among leading West, the reason I was being quizzical is that you were looking worried as I was saying it, and I thought, ooh, perhaps this isn't right. Amongst leading Western European banks by 2015, that was in a publication called The Banker, which is owned by, appropriately enough, the Financial Times. Thina.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I work as the Macro Oil Analyst, and I totally agree with Mats here. If you asked me 2 years ago if you saw any money going out from the oil sector, which is my main focus, and into other sectors, a changing of the financial money from fossil fuels to more greener energy, I would say that went really slowly. The interest for green options were not there at that moment. But if you look now, it's been a great change for the last 1.5 years, and that is what I'm going to show you now. One of the major changes, as I see it as an oil analyst, is the way the actual oil companies are talking, or the way they are talking about the market and how they see themselves in the market. And just to give you some examples, what I show you here, like the 10 largest oil and gas companies in the world are now cooperating to get a carbon price. And for 10 oil and gas companies, which are actually part of the increase in the emissions being actually the one asking for a carbon price, I think that says something. If this would not have happened 2 years ago, but this is a big change that these companies are actually asking for this. Other big changes. Shell, for example, pulling out of Alaska this year with no return ticket. That is a big change. What are we using oil for? Well, most of it, 55%, goes into the transportation sector, and so far there haven't been much of a competition in this sector. But now we're seeing changes here as well. One thing is electric cars, and I think it's quite interesting to see as well the car industry, because I have included here another example. Toyota, for example, came out with a car like a month ago or something, and this car was a hybrid car going on electricity and hydrogen. And what did Toyota say? Well, basically the company said that by the mid of this century, we are probably not going to sell a car which are using either diesel or petrol, because we're focusing on greener energy. And most of the more, maybe one of the more surprising articles we've seen this year is from British Petroleum, because the chief economist came out with a report saying that forget about how do you actually see the oil balance. Peak oil is history. What you should focus on going forward when you look at the oil market is, first of all, shale oil, because that changes the price setting strategy in the market. But the second thing is that the increasing concerns about climate and emissions will have an increasing impact on the oil companies. So these are big changes, and most of these changes have arrived for the last year. So how do we see and what do we expect, and how can we see money moving from carbon sectors into greener investments going forward? One important thing we're working for is to set a price on carbon, or at least to make more public what kind of carbon footprint we have. And why is that? Because it's important for investors, but also from the lending side, that we could have a common view about the carbon footprint. So how do you actually see the changes? I think the changes came first in the insurance industry, and as the governor of the central bank in England have pointed out earlier this year, that the cost for insurance companies are increasing because of changes in the climate. One thing is the physical risk the companies have, which need to be priced as well, because we're seeing that the changes in the environment actually influences the profitability of companies. The second thing which is important and why we need a carbon footprint is because the investors need to know what they're investing in. What kind of risk do they have? And the carbon risk is important to reveal. So otherwise you risk that we are investing too much in assets. We don't know the profitability in the longer term. So this can influence the shareholders' value in the longer term, and that is one important factor here. The second thing is the creditworthiness of a company. Especially for a lending organization, it's important to know the creditworthiness, and if, of course, the climate changes and the carbon risk is increasing, we need to get that open as well, so we know actually what we're paying for and the risk of lending to this organization. Of course, it needs to be reflected in the stock value, because that goes into your portfolio risk. And the total risk, if we don't have a more open risk and clearer measure of the carbon risk, is what we've seen from the financial crisis. For example, in the housing market, if we invest too much in one sector and we don't know about the risk, or we haven't put a price on this risk, we risk of having a systemic crisis, and that is the worst, I think, the worst case scenario with this. So I think it's interesting to see that the IMF actually went out earlier this year and said that they're going to start including the climate risk into the calculations of the economic forecast going forward. And that's something I think other banks should follow, as well as Nordea should follow as well. Do we see money moving into this sector? Yes, we do. It's a big change here as well. I think it's a big change since the Copenhagen conference, because it's difficult to get investors to move into a sector you don't see profitability. That's changed markedly the last few years, because we're seeing that the cost of producing, for example, wind power, solar power has decreased sharply. Also, the price of battery capacity has increased sharply. So now you have much more financial money moving into this sector, because we're seeing that actually the profitability of this sector is increasing. So these are big changes we have seen since the last big climate meeting. And at the very end, what do Nordea do as the biggest banking group in the Nordic region? Well, so far we can't see that the banks have been leading, but we're trying to take the first steps. We now, just a few weeks ago, said we're going to be carbon neutral in our own operations. We also have, for the last year actually, seen quite a big growing interest for green bonds. So these are some of the examples of the green bonds we have had out in the market. We are also focusing on how we could, in a better way, make it clear what kind of carbon, or be much clearer what kind of carbon footprint we have on our lending side and on our investment side, and we're now making tools to get that more visible for the clients as well. So these are some of the examples we have. This is just a start. Of course, you have a long way to go, but for sure there is a growing interest and it's a growing focus on this from the banking side as well. Thank you.